State financial aid continuing to expand within higher education all across the country, allowing money to go to eligible illegal immigrant students. Increased spending is heating up debate all over the place on whether or not such individuals should receive taxpayer-funded higher education benefits. Joining us to discuss what both sides of this issue are saying is the Center Square education reporter, Esther Wickham. Esther, thanks for taking time with us. It's always good to see you. You reported that currently there's around 21 states and the District of Columbia offering in-state tuition eligibility to certain immigrant students. Talk a bit about this and where else this is playing out across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Greg, for having me. This definitely is a continuing heated debate around the country as more and more states offer in-state eligibility for tuition for illegal immigrant students, as well as state financial aid programs. So currently, according to the Federation for American Immigration Reform, a report came out in 2025 that nationally it's about $5.7 billion in taxpayer funding that's costing taxpayers for state financial aid programs, and the difference these illegal immigrant students are receiving when they get in-state tuition compared to U.S. citizens and American students applying for colleges and universities that they wish to go to. When it comes to the in-state tuition, if they live out of state, they have to pay the base tuition. And so according to higher ed immigration, like you said, 21 states, including D.C., are offering in-state tuition eligibility for certain immigrant students. And currently there are 18 states, along with D.C., that provide access to state financial aid programs. And we'll get into a little bit later what exactly those look like. But more and more states are implementing the DREAM Act, RISE Act, Promise scholarships that specifically allow illegal immigrant students to, apply, have certain eligibility requirements. And the main requirement is that they only have 3 years of high school status.
What are critics saying about this, other than just the $5 billion cost to taxpayers all across the country?
Yeah. So one of the main arguments that we're seeing is the eligibility requirement. Now, a lot of these states, the main requirement, like I said, is the 3 years in high school, but it's also the main recipients that we're seeing are DACA students. So Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which is essentially providing temporary protection for deportation and renewable work permits to certain immigrants who were brought to the United States as children. So there are currently over 900,000 of these individuals eligible for DACA. And right now there's over 500,000 illegal immigrant students that are enrolled in colleges and universities. And so I spoke with a few education experts who are kind of critics of these state financial aid programs, specifically Ira Melman. He's the media director for FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. And they've provided a lot of different reports on how much these programs are actually costing taxpayers and the difference between U.S. citizens and illegal immigrant students that are actually partaking in these immigration programs.
Esther, you reported a bit about what's going on in Texas. You've got significant costs, but also some litigation that's happened there. Highlight that from your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, the DREAM Act is the main point of controversy. And something that Ira Melman kind of highlights is Texas was this main state that pioneered this kind of loophole that we see in the 1996 Immigration Reform Act, which essentially says that when you provide in-state tuition to, as he says, illegal aliens, you also have to have it available for U.S. citizens. And so he says that in the state of Texas in 2001, they created this loophole or provision that conditioned in-state tuition if you have only completed 3 years of high school in the state. And so currently the Trump administration has taken many steps to combat that provision, that law. And so in June of last year, we saw the U.S. Department of Justice sue the state of Texas, saying that you are actually violating federal law and citing the supremacy clause, that federal law says that any kind of state programs or state tuition should be eligible for all citizens, for all American students. And Texas isn't necessarily doing that. And so we're seeing a lot of these advocacy groups intervening and saying, the case has to be resolved and it can't be without sufficient judicial review, and that these students should be eligible to have the opportunity to go to school and receive state aid.
There are so many different facets to this, Esther. One question I definitely want to touch on here is, cui bono, who benefits? Because this is not just happening in Texas, this is happening in other states. But before we get to that question of, who benefits, obviously these certain students either in the country illegally or who might have certain types of protective status. There's a lot of, different types of definitions underneath that umbrella of non-citizen. But how does this impact the student loan debate and the amount of debt that there is right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke with Lance Azumi. He is one of the education experts for Pacific Research Institute. And, they're mainly based in California. So he had a lot to say for the state of California, since it is a huge blue state that contributes a lot of funding, not only in education, but other sectors for illegal immigrants. And a main thing he had to say is the fairness aspect. What about these taxpayer-funded programs are going to illegal immigrants at the cost of other American citizens? He highlights every single time a legal immigrant student is getting into these colleges, that takes a seat away from a hard-working taxpayer family for a student that wanted to go to those schools. So not only is it just the cost, but also the opportunity. And so we're seeing this student loan increase. And I think, Greg, that's not only this issue, it's just education in general around grants and scholarship programs. I think nowadays a lot of students are kind of wary or unsure how to go about the cost, the daunting cost of education, as we're seeing it increase year after year. And there are a lot of grants and scholarship opportunities out there, but unfortunately, it's just not readily available, or education is not really around it to figure out what's available for them. So the cop out, the easy thing to do is just, get a student loan and worry about it 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And so I think that's a big issue we're seeing is this opportunity kind of being taken away. And some people that support these programs had, opposition in response to say it against that.
Well, and I do want to hear a little bit of what you found supporters of these policies are saying. But, regardless if it's a citizen or a non-citizen that gets a student loan, that's obviously adding to, the issue of debt concerns and financial management and whatnot. But somebody's getting that money, Esther. Back to that cui bono question, who benefits? I bet the schools in these various states are saying, hey, they're seeing some money come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and like I said, when it comes to the in-state tuition, ultimately who benefits are these illegal immigrant students, because they're getting kind of a deducted amount spending for the college. For example, in the UC system, it's approximate, it's rough, but in-state tuition costs around $15,000 annually for in-state tuition, where the base tuition for a UC school is around $31,000. And so those that live in California, for example, and those DACA students, those illegal immigrant students that are applying for the DREAM Act or other programs like it in California, get that in-state tuition base, and they're essentially, saving themselves $16,000. But when you provide more programs like that and you get more students, it does ultimately benefit the schools at the taxpayer expense.
Well, Esther, plenty more to report out about that and many more things happening on the education space, including the latest on what's happening at the U.S. Department of Education. But we're going to have to save this story that people can find at thecentersquare.com under the education tab, where you can find other issues our reporters, including Esther, are working diligently to address. You can find those stories at thecentersquare.com.